Steins Gate is one of the most overwhelmingly Japanese anime I've ever seen. And no, I'm not talking about it having annoying mascot characters or a monster girl harem. I'm talking about something much more important. Memes. That's really the bread and butter underpinning this quirky time-traveling romp. Our main cast are all members of a relatively underground culture who spend all day arguing on message boards, playing galgay, and making cosplay. And the way they communicate with each other is heavily reliant on assumed knowledge about this slice of Japan. When it comes time to localize such an inward-looking series that was clearly not designed for a Western audience, there are bound to be incongruities and hurdles, and that goes double for dialogue that makes obscure references to even more obscure pockets of the internet. With that said, the dubbed version of Steins Gate has a history of making changes that contextualize some of the more niche elements, increasing overall accessibility of the show, all while faithfully representing the intent of the original script. That's all well and good when it comes to the original series, it's really a triumph of localization, but Steins Gate Zero introduces a previously unseen challenge in human form. That challenge is Professor Alexis Leskinen. This goofy professor blends just about all of the localization headaches you could imagine. Not only does he have regular outbursts of enthusiastic English and wear his culture shock on his sleeve, one of Leskinen's most distinct features is the way he addresses the main character as Lintahlo instead of Lintahlo, due to L and R being pronounced the same way in Japanese. As trivial as this sounds, it's actually kind of an important detail of his character. It introduces a sort of gap moe between his incredible skill as a scientist and his more comical and youthful demeanour. And the visual novel makes it very clear that this isn't something he affects to be funny or quirky, because even in pretty serious situations, which I won't show due to spoilers, he still addresses Okabe using this pet name. So the first pretty major problem makes itself clear, right? How do you represent this complex clash of characteristics with such a subtle, untranslatable pronunciation difference? Well, I suppose Leskinen could call him Lintahlo in the dub, but that lacks the context of the Japanese and assumes knowledge that the casual anime fan is unlikely to have. And more importantly, it would also clash pretty horrendously with the rest of the English cast. So what did Funimation do instead? Kind of nothing? Now don't get me wrong, I know that sounds like a misstep on paper, and it's usually the sort of thing I'd be pretty hard on a localization team for doing, but that's not really warranted here. Sure, it would be great if we could get a one-to-one translation of every joke and every eccentricity of the source material, but in this case there's no clear way to do that doesn't run the risk of confusing or putting off the viewer. In the Steins Gate Zero dub, Leskinen pronounces Lintahlo the same way as everyone else, but otherwise his energy and naivete pick up the slack for what is, in essence, a minor compromise. What this change ultimately means is that Funimation didn't have to shoehorn in some ill-fitting accent for Leskinen, despite the name and looks he is American, or otherwise hinder any potential gravitas to his performance to accommodate for what can ultimately be a negligible trait to his character. But really, that's just one word. Can the same philosophy of compromise for congruity be applied to translating a lecture on neuroscience and artificial intelligence? In a rare but not unprecedented move on Funimation's part, the English dub for Steins Gate Zero actually has an actor speaking Japanese. Yeah, really. Maho, voiced by Monica Rial, is Professor Leskinen's assistant, and during the demo for Amadeus, she acts as his interpreter by translating his English into Japanese. In the original Japanese, this is an unremarkable detail. The show being dubbed in Japanese means that the in-universe languages match with the out-of-universe languages without a hitch. In the English dub, however, this presents a pretty significant problem. How do you represent Leskinen speaking English in a dub where every other character speaks English too? The method that Funimation ultimately settled on was having Leskinen speak English, obviously, but also have Maho start off speaking Japanese and transition into English as well. While unconventional, this technique effectively communicates a fair bit of information to the viewer without grinding the show to a halt or filling the screen with translator notes. It subtly but clearly signposts that in-universe, the characters all speak Japanese, except Leskinen, and it contextualizes this information in real time so the audience can adjust to the change by the end of the first sentence. And while it would be difficult to see how any other technique could have worked as well given the source material, the fact that Funimation was able to arrive at this one shows real care and thoughtfulness on their part. But perhaps most importantly, their success was far from guaranteed. For as decidedly Japanese as Steins Gate is, there is an equally un-Japanese series in the classic Black Lagoon. In-universe, the denizens of Rowanapur speak English, despite the original series being voiced in Japanese. This isn't particularly problematic or uncommon, just look at JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. However, a problem does arise in a scene, much like Steins Gate, involving one character translating between English and Japanese. The bilingual Japanese-born protagonist Rock acts as an emissary between Balalaika and some Yakuza, and in the English dub that means keeping the original voice work for the Yakuza and dubbing Rock and Balalaika accordingly. Nothing wrong there, the in-universe languages are represented accurately out of universe too, but the problem actually lies in the original Japanese voiceover. Yes, it's possible. Up until this point in the series, Balalaika has spoken fluent Japanese, and to have her suddenly speaking English for the purpose of allowing this scene to exist shows horrible incongruity, the kind that Steins Gate Zero's dub could have very easily fallen into. Sure, her speaking Japanese was out of universe, and it's supposed to be implied that she's speaking English in the show, even though Revy often swaps between the two languages, confusing the issue more, but it's the complete lack of transition between fluent Japanese and proficient English that completely throws this scene off. If Black Lagoon's Japanese version had emulated the same technique as what Steins Gate Zero's dub did, i.e. simply transitioned part of the first sentence, that confusion would have completely dissipated, and it's entirely due to how each series contextualized the dialogue in their respective scenes. The fact of the matter is, you don't need to dedicate entire conversations, or even YouTube videos, on contextualizing the language barriers in dialogue. You only need to use maybe one measly line, like in Metal Gear Solid 3, to demonstrate the implications it will have for the rest of the game's dialogue.
By the way, your Russian is superb.
It's not an infallible standard, but it certainly stops the audience from questioning how different characters can even communicate, and it removes the need for terrible, unconvincing accents to boot. You can really get away with a lot as long as you establish it properly. For myriad reasons, I consider the original Steins Gate's English dub to be a localization success story. And if the momentum that this dub has demonstrated in a few short episodes continues, I think it's safe to say Steins Gate Zero will become one as well. That's all from me on Steins Gate Zero for now. If you're curious about more of my thoughts on localization, check out my video on My Hero Academia's All Might. Or maybe you're interested in the structure and format of your favourite tragicomedies. I've got a video on that too. Otherwise, you can subscribe here or follow me on Twitter for any updates.